Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Fearless Conversations. My name is Dawn Town, and this is the amazing Jade Lotso and Rochelle Ragusi. We are so excited to dive in on more topics today. So the first topic we're going to be covering is Twitter and all of the censorship that we've seen. There's a lot we want to dive into with where we are at with censorship. And I know we've talked about censorship before, but this has come to the forefront even more so recently. What's been interesting about this is, I don't know if you've heard about the James O'Keefe tapes that came out with Jack Dorsey saying, there's going to be more censorship coming down the line. And then he's also put out an explanation on Twitter that I think was very accurately described in the Daily Wire as duck, dodge, flip, because the statement was so convoluted in the sense of he justified it, but then he said it was a dangerous precedent. But the statement was kind of all over the place. And the other thing with Parler coming down, Michael Knowles put out a really good write-up on this where he talked about when all of this censorship really started. You heard people say, we'll just create another app and we'll just go talk on these other, we'll create competition and go to another app. Well, now that they've taken Parler down, and not just taken the app down out of the App Store, but they've removed, like AWS and Amazon have removed the cloud infrastructure, their management system, so they can't even, they don't even have servers to be able to host this on. He talked about you can't continue to create all these new things. Like, we're not going to create a whole new internet. So it doesn't really work to say, oh, we'll just create this. I mean, you can in some sense, but when the censorship goes beyond just demonetizing YouTube channels and taking apps off platforms, when it gets to the space of you are really crushing your competition, you're eliminating your competition, this monopoly that they've created on what information we're all allowed to see, when it becomes so huge, there clearly has to be some regulation. And as somebody who identifies more with capitalism, we tend to shy away from regulation, but when it comes to something like this and as serious as the information we're allowed to see, I feel like that's a whole different ballgame. So I was just curious what you ladies think about the censorship that we've seen that's just been, it's coming, like I said in the first promo or episode, closer and closer to home, it feels like.
I wanted to, just read the two tweets that Twitter specifically referenced that were of Trump's that were so terrible to them that they had to censor him. And so there was two of them that they referenced. And the first one was, the 25 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first, and make America great again, will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. And then the second one was, to all those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. And so what I find really interesting about that is he's speaking, we kind of talk about how Trump's not a politician, but he's speaking the language of a politician where they're advocating for their side, like, we're going to fight this and they're not going to be disrespected. This is common language for politicians to be speaking. It's nothing abnormal. And as far as him saying he wouldn't be at the inauguration, well, Twitter really had to infer a lot from that because it was their kind of claim that he was saying, hey, I'm not going to be there, so it's safe to cause destruction. I mean, they're really reading into things that really simply are not there. And especially when we look at, I'm assuming both of you guys kind of listened to the speech that Donald Trump gave on the day of the Capitol Hill storming. And he specifically said to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So there was nothing in his speech, and really if you listen to the whole thing, there was nothing in there that suggested that he was inciting violence. And so, and then now I'm kind of getting in the territory of the impeachment and stuff, but they really had to infer a lot to accuse him of inciting violence. And so I take the same approach that Ben Shapiro did. He definitely used his voice to increase the temperature. Like, hey, this election just doesn't seem natural. It doesn't seem right or plausible that Biden would have this much support and would have won by this much, especially when you compare it to who Biden is, the way that he speaks, and then you look at the support that Obama had, where he's like this legend and he's this icon, and Biden somehow turned out more supporters than Obama did, and especially looking at his lengthy career where he has just been so unsupported for so long that all of a sudden this would be a thing. And I think that those are real things that we have concerns about, that Trump supporters would have concerns about, but where Trump really needed to step in, he should have said, I mean, it seems unlikely, but the evidence has to be proven in order for us to do anything. So there was evidence of fraud and irregularities within this past election, but there was never enough to change the outcome. There was never enough proven to change the outcome. And I think he kind of worked to create enemies because he didn't like the outcome. Whereas he needed to just be honest, like, this doesn't look right, but we don't have the evidence, or we're working on getting the evidence. So that's how I think he increased the temperature, is he kind of was calling out all these people and these organizations, and he's saying, he's creating enemies. And he really should have been more responsible with that. But I mean, listen to this tweet. It says, "Our election was hijacked. There is no question. Congress has a duty to hashtag protect our democracy and hashtag follow the facts." Does that sound like a Trump supporter or Donald Trump? That was Nancy Pelosi in 2017, And so they went for 4 years where they talked about a rigged election, and it was fraudulent, and Donald Trump wasn't actually the president because of Russia. This went on for years, and they spent millions of dollars on this. And so now they're doing this gaslighting thing where now they're saying this was the most secure election in American history. Well, what do they have to prove that? They can make that claim, but they have to back it up. If you make a claim, you have to back it up, and they have nothing. But even just a couple things where Kamala Harris was tweeting to have people post bail for the rioters. Well, she called them protesters, but if they need bail posted, that means they were acting in lawlessness because they were arrested. And so she's asking for people to donate money to people that were protesting in Minneapolis, and just all these different people. The supreme leader of Iran, who has referred to Israel as a cancerous growth and said that it needs to be uprooted and destroyed, he still has a Twitter account. So we can't pretend that this banning of Trump was due to their fear of violence and this uprising of violence, when they allow all these people and these things that have been said for so long. So, I mean, if they're going to take that stance, then they need to be consistent all the way through. And even that tweet that Kathy Griffin put out where she's holding up that severed head of Trump. So she got a lot of backlash for that when it initially happened, but she tweeted it out again on election night. And it's still up. Wow. And I think they flagged it. What they flag it as potentially sensitive content, but it was allowed to stay up. So you can hold a head, like a severed head up of the president of the United States, and that's not inciting violence. But to say, hey, I'm not going to be at the inauguration on the 20th, or my followers will not be disrespected, that's inciting violence.
Yeah.
And so it's very inconsistent. You see a lot of this gaslighting too, where, for 4 years they were saying these things, and now that the tables have turned and they won, now they're saying, there's nothing to be questioned here. So which is it? There's so much inconsistency, and Twitter has been extremely inconsistent in this.
Well, is it a policy you're after, like a principle, or people? Because when you start with policy, but then you go on this hatred of people, like there's a difference of like hating fraud or hating anything that's not freedom, totalitarian or anything like that. But when you see it just aiming towards, because if it's a principle, then you could stay steady with that, and it'll play out. Yeah. And facts are stubborn things, those things. But when it starts as a principle, and then we see the true fruit of, hey, we're showing heads, we're like, where's the violence coming from? And it's towards people now, and people aren't the real enemy in this. Yes, there's people with ideals, but if we're really sticking with the principle, like that's what I'm seeing, like. Yeah. And the hypocrisy that comes from that. So just like stick to, if you really mean what you say, you're going to stick to the principle, and that's where it's kind of getting double-sided.
Yeah. And I think too, what's even come out in the last few days is that one of the justifications Jack Dorsey and Twitter used for why they banned Trump was because they said that, his tweets incited the Capitol riots. But now it's come out over the last few days that Facebook was actually used to coordinate a lot of the efforts together. So if we were to say, okay, let's just trust Twitter and let them censor all these voices, what happens, as the story continues to unfold and more information comes out? A point was validly brought up. Are we going to see Facebook deplatformed? I think we can all sit here and say, no, they're not going to be deplatformed. And so I think it's so important, and it should be so clear why censorship is terrible, because as the story unfolds, as more information becomes available, sometimes the story changes. It's like judging a book by its cover. It's easy to look at something and just initially have an emotional reaction. But if you allow something to play out and you have more voices that are brought, you can really see a comprehensive, full view picture and realize that, okay, maybe what I thought I saw was not the only angle to look at this from. Maybe there's more to the story. But when we get into censorship and just immediately condemning and immediately like, I need to shut this down, this isn't right, that's where you get into this dangerous territory. And I feel like that's where you see communism. I mean, that's what they do in communist China. They control the media.
Right.
And it's just dangerous.
And let people think for themselves. I even think of like the Nashville bombing. Like anytime someone packages something really quick and puts a bow and says, this is it, this is what it is. But then you go back and look, how long did it take to investigate the bomb in Oklahoma or this or that, you know, like it kind of makes people think. And I think it's good because we do need to think. And when it's that one-sided, like you say, that's what propaganda is. And I think being educated right now is so important because do people even know what that means, you know? And it's not like we're being like conspiracy theorists or this or that, or we're just loonies because we're not going along with the, I mean, just look at the vibe of where this is going. I think if anybody just kind of takes a breath, you will kind of be like, whoa, okay, I should probably look into this, and just to encourage people to do that.
Yeah. And I think too, what we can do as, you know, common citizens is definitely be involved in your elections where you are electing officials that are going to put forward policies and legislation that's going to hold you know, these companies accountable. Because sometimes it can feel like, okay, well, what do we do? Right now, we're using our voice. We are talking about hot topics and things that, you know, we know could be deplatformed later or censored later. But I think using your voice now is important. And I think being involved in knowing who you're electing, not just on the presidential level, but the Senate level and the congressmen, like you really have to know, are they, where they stand on particular issues. Go to the town halls, go to the public, you know, as people are leading up to elections, go to those rallies that they have and where they allow people to come forward and ask questions and ask these questions. Are you planning to put forward legislation to big tech companies? I think those things are important. And I know, you know, I'll get into it maybe just a little bit. I know this is kind of a bleed over, but I'm kind of in the flow of this thought process. One thing that I have been hearing a lot about is, what do we do for the Republican and the conservative movement going forward? And one thing I heard Ben Shapiro talk a lot about, and I'm curious on what your thoughts are on all of this, is we need to do, in some sense, what a lot of the Democrats have been doing over the years, as far as like being boots on the ground, going door to door, registering voters, registering this new generation that's turning 18 that can vote, and really being more hands-on in election years. We need to be more face-to-face with voters that are turning of age and our neighbors, and having these conversations. We've done that on the Republican level, you know, to a degree, but I think there's room for improvement. So I was curious what you ladies think as far as like the Republican conservative movement going forward.
I feel like even to answer that question, I have to go back, and this is the beauty of this, because we all may have different points of view on this. Even Trump, like I feel like even how he handled it, considering fraud, like I really believe the propaganda and all this has trained people to look away. But if we look at what an affidavit is, and that's someone willing to say, hey, put me in jail if this isn't true. There was so many that came forth. The problem I don't feel like we could even, that is true with fraud. How can there be a fair election again? I think that we're at the depth of a crucible more than we think personally. And I think that people are knowing that without just vote just this, that, like there's literally freedom is on the line right here, and that's freedom and justice can't be served. Like we want peace, like let's just keep going. But if things are crooked in here and the justice scales aren't balanced, there's no way moving forward. I don't know what this means. All I know is that when division comes, it looks bad, but at the end of it, if we are truly standing for liberty and justice and righteousness, that we will be more unified moving forward. But I feel like I can't even, in right standing in my spirit, just be like, oh, that's fine, let's move on. Like I feel like there's too much of a problem to address here, and that was ignored. Like, why can't we hear it out? Why weren't the audits? Why was everything? Why is this voice yelling so loud that this is not true, and that, oh, this hypocritical voice, like, why are you looking into this when they made up the fake story with Russia, and then it's happening again, and now forget it. You said that, but like going back, like, I feel like considering the pressure and what Trump was facing, like, I feel like he did good considering all of this, and like, this must be hard, but let's encourage the church. Like, the church has more power than I think we think, and we are to to be aware, to be praying, to be standing for truth, to be standing for justice, to be standing for righteousness. And I think why out of all these things are what's going to be squelched. And when you look at any move like this, it's anybody who is going to say this is truth and they're going to get offended by it. So I think there's a greater root issue, and I'm not one to just stir up disrest, but my conviction, I just feel like it's more serious than we think, but not to be hopeless. Like we need to find solutions and we need to move forward together.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the key too. Like when people keep talking about disunity and we need to unite, we need to have peace. Well, you can't move forward without friction, and this is a friction that we're seeing right now. This is in order for America to authentically move forward, this had to come, where we had to have this reckoning because I think for too long it went on where really Trump was elected as for the culture war, not for his policies. I mean, for some people, yeah, it was the policies, but for a lot of people that voted for him, it was to have that loud voice representing their side in this culture war, because for so long the left, or they demonize the right, and they've had control of every major institution for how long now? We talk about it all the time, the education system, the media, Hollywood, and now big tech, and they've pushed their side and their voice for so long, and a lot of Republicans have just laid down and let it happen, and they just keep allowing it to happen. And what Trump came in and did was he was not a politician, and so he was this mouthpiece, and
right.
And I don't
crushed political correctness.
Yes, and so I don't think that he was right in everything that he said or the way that he handled everything, but he was necessary in this moment. He kind of highlighted that friction that was there. He amplified it, but it wasn't that it wasn't there before. It's just so many people were being quiet about it, and it took somebody coming in and being loud and illuminating it. That's what I really feel. And so I think if the election that we see today, if it was legitimate and fair, we lost because so many people have been manipulated, by the media and I'm in college right now, so I can speak to that, and I know what they push. Not every teacher, I'm not going to put that on every teacher, but I know what is pushed and what has to be quiet or dimmed down, or if you have this certain view, you have to tiptoe around it or walk on eggshells. And I butted heads with one of my professors because I just refused to back down. And there are times where you think I have to take a stand, and then there are other times where you're like, it is in everybody's best interest if I'm just a little bit quiet right now. And but I'm never gonna side with what I disagree with. So if you're gonna walk all over me, I'm not gonna side with you, but sometimes there might not be a pushback, and I have to wait for the proper moment to do so. And I had a professor that was very she made it difficult for me. It was extremely difficult, but I feel like in doing the hard work, I came out stronger because of it, and I came out better because of it, and I'm equipped to use my voice. I know how to push back against this in many ways. And so I think that the more we get in there and we exercise that, and when it comes to children, I think that we're just not doing justice by them when you see so many parents say, like, I don't want to push this on my kids, I don't want to burden them with politics and such. But you need to be having these conversations at home, because when you send them out, those conversations are had, and then they only hear one side of it. So what we try to do our best is to present both sides. And some people say, well, I don't even tell my kids my beliefs. Well, we tell our kids our beliefs. I don't brainwash them and say, you must believe this. But I'm going to tell you my beliefs, and I'm going to tell you why I believe them. And then you evaluate that. What does that look like to you? And I think a lot of people are not doing that. And so if we're sending our kids out into the world when they get older, they're going off to college or getting into the workforce, they need to be equipped beforehand, because they are going to be bogged down by all of this, and they're not going to know how to handle it. And so I think that that's a big piece too, that I just feel like Christians and conservatives and Republicans need to step up in that aspect.
Yeah, I completely agree, because if we don't educate our children, we're leaving it up to the public school system. And I don't know how much experience you guys have had with hearing your kids come back and tell you things, but even this week, one of my children came back and told me something that a teacher said that was incredibly offensive. I mean, this is intimidating young conservative voices. Her impression of, she's still very impressionable with life, and for her to feel like her voice, she has to be stifled and intimidated not to say where she stands on something, because she knows the atmosphere of what this teacher is setting in the classroom is one where if you don't stand with me, then you might as well be lumped in with who I think Trump is and all of this stuff. It was just really unhealthy. And one thing I wanted to go back to with the boots on the ground topic too is whatever plays out over the next couple weeks, like my main point of saying what we could do to move forward, regardless of whether we would have had a Republican in the office or a Democrat in the office too, is just understanding that even something like a year before the elections, Pennsylvania had passed this absentee ballot registration legislation where you could vote 2 to 3 months early. And I think there's a lot of good points that are being made, especially by Ben Shapiro, where it's saying that's not what elections are meant to be. Yes, if you are sick or there's a legitimate reason why you're voting absentee, that makes sense. But to do widespread voter ballot, there's just too much of a risk for fraud and not to mention, there's just so much information that comes out literally to the end of an election. And you do have people that have come back to say, oh, I wish I hadn't voted for Biden because of all of these things that came out towards the end. And so once Pennsylvania legislation was passed, there should have been on the Republican side, conservative side in Pennsylvania, them going back to fight that legislation like a year ahead of time rather than waiting. And I know there was some different things that came out about why they waited, but seeing what we've seen up to this point, this should be a wake-up call for everyone in every state to say, if these things are being passed, you have to be involved in your local politics, your regional politics. You have to know these things, and it can feel overwhelming. Like, what can I do? But I think these things that we're talking about are just important for how you can stay involved and really be in the know. Because I just, like you were saying with kids, I think, and you had referenced it earlier, I don't think you cannot be in the know right now because, and then you can't complain later. So if you didn't get involved.
I totally agree with that. And just even thinking about like the education component, I mean, I think for the first time I read the Constitution all the way through this week, but just being aware of like protecting from domestic and foreign enemies, like what does that look like too? And even the allegations and the laptop, I mean, a lot of that that hasn't really been looked into. And like, what does that mean when someone dabbles financially with empires that want you destroyed? You know, I mean, just logically, like looking into that, and just to think about like the interest, if your family is benefiting from that and you begin to put your family above the American people, we need to be aware. And I think, I mean, I feel like the first paragraph of We the People, I feel like just kind of sums it all up, because then it kind of gets the details, but I love it. It's we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So it's like, it's very clear and concise. And what's interesting too, like you look at like when people rewrite even a stimulus package and how many pages it needs to be, our Constitution does not have a bunch of stuff, and even like just words just to twist around and to use for your benefit. And even Alexander Hamilton, I believe it was one of his quotes when he said, you can't understand clearly and read through something and have understanding, like I would be concerned. Like, so basically saying not just add all this, you know, so no, like enough's enough.
Yeah.